morning, everybody. I won't go through the same spiel I've just done. We're going to cover today update from all the nations. There hasn't obviously been a lot of changes. I'm sure Ian will mention about missing out on a haircut in a minute. Then we're going to chat primarily today with Greg and David. Brilliant to have these guest speakers in with us. So we're changing tack slightly to talk to different people about different things. Something other than COVID as well, which is always a great change. Then we'll do a quick update and then we'll fire into questions. And as Jill has said already, please can you keep your questions coming. Obviously we want to make sure there's plenty of debate at the end of the session. So Ian, I'm going to hand over to you.
Hi everybody. It doesn't seem possible that it was only a week that we last did an update, and there was quite a lot of information there. As we've already just said, not that much has changed this week. Fortunately, I think looking at the milestones within the roadmap, certainly England and Wales and the other devolved nations all seem to be on track for meeting whatever milestones that each nation has set up. Clearly, there's some worry that the case rate might uptick, but that could be as a result of more testing, workplace testing, which I know we're encouraging our clients to consider, and also school testing, which might be contributing to some of this uptick. Hopefully, so long as the hospital admission rates go down and numbers in hospitals and the death rate continues to fall, hopefully the key steps will all be met, and all nations will be able to look forward to a more relaxed, yet with certain controls being in place. So no change at the moment for England. Scotland did announce some that from the 12th of March, they were able to restart non-contact sport. Exercise or fitness can take place in groups up to 15 people, including the instructor and coach. Sessions must take place within an organised sports protocol, so your NGBs, including risk assessments, social distancing and hygiene. And for under 12s, contact sport is permitted with a maximum up to 30, including the coaches. Sporting activity for children under 5 is not counted towards the gathering limit for exercise outdoors. Please refer to the relevant guidance of CIMSPA and also Sport Scotland, the links of which will be in the presentation when you get these fired out at the end. If we can move on. If we look at Wales, from the 13th of March, they made a number of reviews. Up to 4 people from 2 different households could now meet outside, including in private gardens. Training sessions in gardens for up to 3 people from 1 other household can take place. Outdoor sports facilities such as golf, tennis and basketball could reopen with a maximum of 4 people from 2 different households. And the guidance stayed from stay at home to stay local. And sadly, there's still no date yet for gyms and indoor facilities to open, yet they have opened hairdressers. So I suppose I need a haircut, but it seems a bit odd that close contact activities have been allowed to restart when others that are not close contact are still being closed. But it's up to each devolved nation to make their choices. Let's just hope we all come through this at the end, and we can look forward to a brighter future. Northern Ireland, no change on where we were or in the Republic of Ireland from last week. So next slide, please. Just some headlines. I'm sure you've all been monitoring it. Almost 24.5 million people now have been vaccinated with the first jabs, and they're forecasting another 500,000 people a day during this week. So the rate is going to increase, and will be soon well over half the adult population being vaccinated, which has clearly got to help put brakes in the way from this escalating and putting the NHS under pressure again. The R rate is currently forecast to be between 0.6 and 0.8, which I think we've all learned now is a good measure, and hopefully we'll continue to see that drop. People testing positive dropped by 4.9%, but as I said, I think we may see a little uptick in that due to the increase in companies that are taking up workplace testing options for encouraging staff to take those. Hospital admissions has continued to drop, which is, to me, the great measure, the one that really tells whether we're on top of this. And deaths of people who tested positive also have continued very positively to fall. Let's hope that continues. Next slide, please. So leisure specific, please make sure you continue to check on your individual NGBs. This is being updated to reflect government advice as it comes out. For outdoor group exercise and personal training, look out for the MD UK guidance due out to be published later this week. More detailed government guidance on sport and leisure is expected in the next week or so prior to the next steps, and I'm sure we might be able to push Greg a little bit on when that might be expected and how that is slowly being filtered out. And we will provide updates as soon as we hear or see anything. So keep your eyes open on the UK Active and Sensible websites as well, as these will be very early indicators that that more guidance is being published. Okay. I think now, so it's nice and short and sweet from me, it's now to introduce Professor Greg White, who some of you will know sits on UK Active Board and has been very central in the negotiations between UK Active, DCMS and the relevant government bodies to try and get guidance out for us. So it's great to have Greg with us, and hopefully we'll be able to get a bit of inside information. So are you there, Greg?
I am indeed. It's great to be here. Thanks for having me on.
I don't know whether you want to... Yeah, great, you've started your camera so everyone can see what you look like as well as hear you.
Oh dear God, they can see the haircut is what they can see.
Another one with a haircut problem as well.
Exactly.
So, as I said to Greg earlier, my wife was threatening to cut my hair for me, which is a real no-no. So I might just have to become Welsh. Greg, we understand you've been heavily involved in discussions with government about the role that ventilation can play. Now, this has been a real hot potato amongst our clients, and how it can help reduce the risk of COVID transmission in sports facilities. Is there any further update on the government's position on this?
I guess the important point to just coin at the beginning. I think a lot of people are sort of failing to understand the importance of ventilation. I mean, what we've done progressively over time is we've moved from this idea that it's all about contact transmission, and we have now begun to understand much better that it is about aerosol and droplet transmission. In other words, airborne transmission. And so to that extent, it's the reason why SAGE in particular, who are advising government, so number 10, PHE, DCMS, etc., have a particular penchant for ventilation. That's why it's sort of number one on the list. SAGE has a ventilation specialist whose specialist area is ventilation, Professor Sean Fitzpatrick, who we have been liaising with for some period of time. I mean, it still is ongoing currently, but it's why ventilation has been at the forefront of the debate. But I think, and I empathise with the sector, because it's one of those things that actually is the most difficult thing to change. Sanitation to some extent is relatively simple. Social distancing is relatively simple. But when it comes to ventilation, particularly 20 litres per second per person in the space, is very difficult to reach, particularly for those that are in old buildings or listed buildings, where airflow has been a particular issue for some time. As it currently stands, despite a number of changes internationally and a number of instances internationally, the 20 litres per second per person still stands, and it doesn't look like, from my conversations, that is going to change anytime soon. So it still remains the number one ventilation requirement.
So do you think that will, the big statement that our roadmap would lead to the 21st of June where restrictions would come off, do you think it will attain beyond that?
Well, I mean, I can certainly tell you that the building regulations, so CIBSE oversee the building regulations, and there are already in place regulations for airflow. And in fact, in the leisure and fitness sector, there are already regulations in place, particularly for swimming pools. So to some extent, I think that those regulations will probably be tightened up, will be included. Whether it remains at 20 litres per second per person will be an interesting one. I can tell you that the building regulators are now looking at making 15 litres per second per person mandatory. and that's in office spaces. So to my mind, I would have thought we can expect that 20 litre per second per person to remain in statute going forward.
When you say mandatory, presumably that is on new build, and the challenge is very much for our clients with older buildings to try and engage customer confidence by upping its ventilation rates as much as anything else.
Well, it's an interesting point, a very interesting point. I think one of the big problems is that retrofitting ventilation systems is incredibly expensive. And so for older buildings and buildings that have got regulations on what you can do to those buildings, I think that these requirements are much more difficult. Certainly what we do know is this idea of opening windows, which, I mean, I can't tell you the frustration it creates for me, in that I spend, months on the science, and then because they can't square the circle, they say, well, just open a window. As if that's going to help. Two problems with opening windows. Number one is that particularly during the winter months, you've got to heat the air. During the summer months, you've got to cool the air. So you've got to treat that air, number one. That costs money and dramatically increases the carbon footprint. I think equally as well, depending on where your facility is, by opening the window, what you do is you bring in potentially polluted air, and what we know is that air pollution is the UK's leading public health issue, which is linked with increase in disease prevalence and early mortality. So it's a particular issue. Where I've tried to circumvent that during this process is that those that are au fait with the guidance will know that we set CO2 limits. Interestingly, those CO2 limits already exist within the sector anyway, but we use that as a surrogate. Just recently, a paper published from Holland, a really lovely paper, actually looked at air purification or air cleaning as a subsidiary to ventilation, and actually what that showed was that if the role of air cleaning can be incredibly important for two reasons. The first and primary reason is what it does is it actually cleans the air itself, so it reduces particulate matter. There are some technologies that actually can remove bacteria and viruses, and so therefore what you can do, even with issues around flow rate, is you can still clean the air and make it safer for customers. In doing that, of course, what you also do is that you improve consumer confidence in the fact that you are doing something proactive. The important point around that is that by cleaning air, what you don't require is conditioning of that air, because effectively it is the recirculation of existing air, so you don't have to heat it or cool it. So the carbon footprint is much, much lower when you are air cleaning.
Okay. I'm sure we'll come back to that. I can see questions already flowing in about that, but I think we need to keep going. I mean, the frustration from us as health and safety people is not only the windows, but people opening fire doors to increase ventilation, which has also got potential negative effects if you don't get it right. So it's a joint issue, but hopefully it will.
Of course, notwithstanding external fire doors, I can tell you the debate I had when I took Sage, the deputy chief medical officer, and a number from DCMS around a tour of gyms in London on the first reopening, so post the first lockdown. And we had a considerable debate about opening or closing fire doors internally. Which clearly is important for HSE and fire prevention, but of course with doors closed, flow rates change, etc. So it's one of those areas that what we have this sort of headline figure, but the nuance is much more difficult to get down to.
Yeah, no, I appreciate that. If we move on, I'm sure we'll come back to ventilation, having seen the chat line flowing up. So from discussions earlier in the week, you said there was some further research around wearing of masks while exercising that the government was looking at. Can you explain what that is and whether it might get introduced?
Okay, so it spawns off the back of a paper that was published by the CDC, so that's the Center of Disease Control in the US, where they highlighted an outbreak at a gym, and this was last year, some considerable period of time ago, in a gym where there was a number of infections linked to a high intensity interval class in an enclosed space. Now that I spent an awful lot of time fundamentally rubbishing the paper because it was full of holes. Firstly, because of the mitigating circumstances. Important to remember that in the US, the requirements is 10 litres per second per person. So they're at half the rate of ventilation that we are in the UK, number one. Number two is that they actually allowed infected people into the class. And that critically is the problem around it's controlling infection and the movement of infected people. And then they had some associative relationship between those people that were wearing masks and those people that wore those masks intermittently. Self-reported, very difficult to ascertain exactly what was going on. But their conclusions were that masks should be worn in indoor spaces during exercise, number one. Then there was another paper just recently published last week from Italy, which was frankly very weak science. And again, I rebutted it quite forcefully. Although the Guardian did cover it on a very small piece in the Guardian a couple of weeks ago, which showed that wearing a face mask only reduces performance by 10%. Now that's all well and good, but they used healthy young individuals. What we know in our sector is that not all of our clients are healthy and young. And in fact, if you consider the amount of rehabilitation that takes place at our centres, 2/3 of all cancer rehab occurs in the health and fitness sector. And so what they didn't answer was the impact of face coverings for those clinical populations, but also for older populations, et cetera, et cetera. So to some extent, what I am currently doing is continually batting away the data that is coming up with regard to face coverings during exercise. What supports that is the fact that currently the WHO do not recommend face coverings during exercise. That has not changed and doesn't look like it will change. And importantly on this is that the DfE itself, so the Department of Education for school children, requires face coverings throughout the school day with the exception of during physical education lessons. So to my mind, I think where we're at now is I don't think the government are going to change their mind based on information from SAGE. I don't think they're going to change their mind on face coverings during exercise. That said, we do know that on the second reopening that there is a requirement for clients and staff to wear face coverings in communal areas. So at reception, in corridors, etc., when effectively we're moving about the facility. So I think that will remain, but I don't think face coverings will come into during exercise.
We can sense your frustration with some of these bits of weak science. We know many of our clients have been frustrated at the speed of which information has come out through either the NGB, SIMSPA or UK Active. Not only is a safe return to business, but also to be able to plan to be financially successful. As someone with an inside track, do you share those frustrations, and where are the roadblocks in the roadmap?
Well, first off, I absolutely share those frustrations. I mean, and I tell you how I level that is that, I'm working on this. I am entirely independent. I don't own a facility. I don't run a gym. I have no financial benefit from gyms reopening, and I find it frustrating. So I cannot imagine how operators feel in this process. I mean, the one thing I will say is that the sector is doing an incredibly good job. And we know that from the numbers, the safety numbers that we see from the sector. And what I would like to do is applaud the sector for contributing to that process. We are collecting data from over 2,000 facilities in the UK. What was deemed 12 months ago would have been deemed as business sensitive is now being released. And that data, I can tell you, is what's keeping us open and puts us on the forefront of our debate with government. But there is no doubt about it. It is. I can't even describe to you how frustrating the process is. That communication and understanding, even particularly on the nuance. So the headline comes out, and then what we will do is push back and just find out what the nuance is on that. And it doesn't appear that there is any nuance. And I think that's the critical problem. That's why it takes such a long period of time. Because I think to some extent what they are incumbent upon us is to raise the question. That then has to go back and have that question answered before they can give us a response. And so that's why it often feels protracted, but it's protracted for everybody. And I think it's probably, going forward, it's a systems error, which I think that they will look at going forward in terms of making this process much more responsive, which it currently isn't.
Thank you. You indicated that clearly the industry has done a great job, and thank you for applauding them, which from what we've seen when we've been out and about, we would concur with. How's the sector now perceived within government, and do they see that we have a place to assist in the recovery of people's health and well-being?
I mean, it's a great question. I think it probably two angles to that. I think number one, I think that there is a very heavy reticence to opening the sector. I think there's a real fear, and that fear, to my mind, is often driven by ignorance. I wrote in The Guardian a few weeks ago about the fact that SAGE and government have no physical activity exercise expertise on their boards who are advising them. And I think that slows us down. But what it also does, it creates a fear within those bodies as to the impact of high ventilation rates and close proximity with groups of people indoors. So it's been an interesting process in that. I think without any shadow of doubt, the collection of data. So I mean, UK Active have done an incredible piece of work bringing this data together. So between July and December of last year, just prior to the third lockdown, collected 75 million visits from over 2,000 facilities. And showed 1.7 cases per 100,000 visits. Now that is, to put that into context, during that same period of time, that was 1,277 cases in gyms, 1,277, and in the general population, it was 23 million. So to some extent, what it does is it shows the very low risk of the gym sector. That has been a game changer for the sector in informing the government that what we can do is do it successfully. And what I would say is that is absolutely down to members doing a stunning job at following the guidance and actually delivering on that.
Do you think that's why this time we've managed to be able to open before hospitality, which clearly at the end of the first lockdown, it was the other way around?
100%. I mean, that has been the key driving force. I mean, it's multi-leveled. I don't want to bore people with this, but I mean, it's multi-leveled. The fact is that we have got stringent regulations on reopening, things like ventilation. There is no other sector in the hospitality sector, with the exception of cinemas, that have a requirement for ventilation. Now that, to my mind, is lunacy. But equally, at the same time, it's one of the things that is driving our numbers down dramatically and keeping us COVID safe. So it's a double-edged sword. It's difficult to achieve, but at the same time, it is making sure that we keep these numbers really very low and demonstrably low. We can say to government, look, this is how low risk the sector is. I think add on top of that, the one thing that the sector does incredibly well is track and trace. And, as we see, a government that spends £57 billion on a system that doesn't work. What we have done really very nicely is demonstrate that we have got, I would dare to say, we have got the best track and trace system of any sector in the UK. So I think we've done a fabulous job of that. Just going back to the question on exercise, I mean, the one thing for me is that, Winston Churchill said it, and that is never waste a crisis. And I think for the physical activity and exercise sector, we certainly haven't done that. And I have never, and it has never been said by an incumbent, so by an in-post chief medical officer, Chris Whitty, who came out and extolled the virtues of exercise and the importance of exercise, irrespective of disease status. That has never been done before. It's only ever been done when they leave office. Liam Donaldson did it when he left office and called it the magic bullet. So I think to some extent, and that drives down to Boris Johnson, who now has a personal trainer. I think what's important to remember here is that we have raised the profile and importance of physical activity and exercise at a government level, but also demonstrated what a fantastic job the sector can do delivering to requirements.
It's a shame it took a very close call with death for Boris as a leader of to actually begin to understand that. Let's hope, if nothing else good comes out of this pandemic, that our profile continues to be raised. Mm-hmm. I saw one question come through on the chat earlier, which I won't say in detail, but what do you think about instructors, our staff, who perhaps have to come in contact with the more vulnerable groups in society? And I know this is probably a personal view from yourself rather than as the position you had, being required to have vaccines if they're going to host those roles and to lead people that are more vulnerable.
Well, I've been pushing very hard. I wrote a blog on this and did a number of pieces in the paper, and I know it's something that you guys are very passionate about, but that is about identifying the sector as an essential service. And I think that's exactly what we are. Now, that being an essential service, as well as having financial implications for things like VAT, etc., I think being an essential service puts us at the front line. And I think for many people on reopening, they will be, many of the staff in centres will be at the front line, because they'll be looking after the huge numbers of people that are rehabilitating and prehabilitating in their facilities, either prior to treatment, peri-treatment or post-treatment. And that is going to grow. We've got estimated to be 150,000 misdiagnoses in cancer. We've got over 4.5 million people now on the waiting list for the NHS. So the importance, the essential service that the sector provides is going to grow going forward. And when it comes to things like vaccine, I mean, I say this from a personal perspective because my wife is a teacher and she has been teaching for the past year, and because she's in her mid-40s, she won't be getting a vaccine for probably another month, which seems lunacy to me. And I think actually, to my mind, if staff in the health and leisure sector will be looking after vulnerable individuals, I think it makes absolute sense that they should be vaccinated, not only to keep themselves safe, but to actually keep others safe. So I think that that's a personal view. The bottom line is that I cannot see the government changing their minds, as we've seen with debates over teachers and police force and etc. They're moving along the age categories. And I can't see that changing at all. So whilst I think they should be vaccinated, I don't think they will.
I think it's more when they get to that stage is whether there's a compulsion, whether a site can risk assess it and say, you must be vaccinated once everybody is capable of having had that vaccine, which I think is probably more the question, which is a more thorny issue, I expect.
Yeah, I mean, that's an absolute political hot potato. Yeah. I mean, just take a look at COVID vaccine passports. It's a really big national issue over protection of data and all of the sort of problems that we get with all sorts of other things like identity cards and that sort of stuff. So it's a much bigger issue. I mean, to that end though, I think from a sector perspective, I think that it is. Reopening, to my mind, is all about consumer confidence. There's no point reopening if people don't walk over the threshold. And I think if operators can demonstrate that people, vulnerable individuals, will be looked after by those who have had vaccinations, that's not forcing everybody to have a vaccination, but it shows that what they will do is assign vaccinated people to support them. I think what that will do is serve to improve consumer confidence and increase the return.
That's amazingly moved into my next question, which was how important do you think the COVID secure controls are that we will be able to demonstrate to the customers will play into the confidence for them to return so that we have a sustainable business recovery? To my mind, I think it's absolutely crucial. Every operator on this call will know that there are some people who will come back even if they think they're going to catch the plague. But the vast majority of people want confidence. They want to know that what they're doing is coming to somewhere that is, we use COVID safe and we talk about safe. Safe is a very difficult word to use, but low risk is really what we're talking about. Is that, and I think that
because nowhere is 100% safe. I mean, that's the bottom line. But I think that it is incumbent upon the sector for their own benefit, to create as low a risk environment as possible. And I think that to some extent, it's an interesting one because it's a double-edged sword. But what this process has done is it is, without any shadow of doubt, improved the environment for the client. So the environment within the sector is better than it has ever been. And to that end, I think it's a very positive thing. So the investment that has taken place, I don't think will be wasted, because I think some of these will become standard procedures moving forward. But I think to some extent what we should be doing is potentially looking at other interventions which do speak to consumers' concerns. Vaccination is one of those. Air quality and air purification is another example of that. The regular sanitation and cleaning of equipment, etc. All of those things. I think anything that we can do over and above that will speak into this narrative of confidence. And what we'll do is we'll see a much more rapid return to normal business following the opening.
Brilliant. Yeah, I mean, I think everybody, that unfortunately people might get used to working out in a space that's twice the size of the gyms used to be, or with half the people, and we've got to build that confidence they can come back into a busy environment, but still be safe.
Yeah.
So I fully concur with that. Do you have any final suggestions and advice for our clinic participants on priorities before reopening? And then we'll go to maybe some questions from people that I've seen coming in.
I guess the one thing is that I would say is never underestimate the confidence issue. I think that there are an awful lot of people who have been disenfranchised through this process. I've written a number of blogs, particularly around women and the gender inequality that has occurred during this. We've seen a dramatic fall in physical activity, particularly in women, disproportionately compared to men. And so, what I would say is that the offering that you make on reopening, you're going to have to work harder for certain sectors, harder than we worked before, because whilst they will be very keen to return, there's an awful lot within those who have been disproportionately affected, who've moved to a position of inactivity. And then what we get is we get to a position where we're trying to reactivate their activity before they have the confidence to return to the gym. So I think there will still be work to be done, but what I would do is take a very targeted approach to those that have been disproportionately affected.
Okay. I'll just ask you one question from the chat that's come up, and then we'll go on to David, because I know there are some sort of conflicts, but also some real synergies between what you've been talking about and what David will, in that clean air is important for everybody and the reduction in carbon emissions is essential. But in the short term, lots of facilities without the capability of achieving 20 litres is going to see their utility costs and utility burning go up, so their carbon output. So we'll come back to that. But we had a question come in about what UK Active is doing to counteract clearly this question has probably come from Wales, the falsehoods being spread by Welsh Assembly. And is there any support for those gyms that have adequate ventilation and are spacious enough to give those confidences?
Well, I mean, I can tell you, if you just asked me that question last week, the air would be blue. I can tell you that the most difficult conversations I've had are with Wales, and it is an ongoing. And I'm sure, if you're in Wales, then what you are doing is reading the media in Wales, and you'll see that we have interfaced with. And sadly, what it's come down to in Wales is that the only way it seems to be the only way to get action is to actually engage the media. Now that tells you where you're at in this process. I think there are particular sensitivities in the home nations, but as we see it now, England, Scotland, and Northern Ireland are in full acceptance of the guidelines that are in place. Wales, it continues to be an ongoing debate. I mean, interestingly enough, as you say, they open hairdressers in terms of close contact for prolonged periods of time. There are key issues around that, but there remains conversation and debate about indoor spaces. It is a debate that we haven't given up on, and we are working incredibly hard on. And UK Active are, they've got the full force of UK Active behind it, trying to move it on. Outdoor sports are back. There's there's almost a paradox here, because outdoor sports are back earlier in Wales than they are in England. So it's an interesting piece, and honestly, I mean, it is frustrating. I can tell you that, because my job and my ethos is to work on evidence base and to be science led, and there is, to my mind, no reason why home nations with the same R value, same hospitalisation, same death rate, same rate of vaccinations, with the same guidance mitigating risk, and with fundamentally the same numbers when it comes to cases per 100,000. I just can't see any reason why there would be a difference in home nations reopening.
Yeah, it's a shame politics sometimes plays games in it, doesn't it? There's one other question which I think is probably more relevant to talking to you now rather than the debate we'll probably have later. But we had a question from someone saying that they know, from other roles with elite athletes, have to comply with testing and sharing data if they want to compete. How is it different for professional people serving in our sector if they also want to continue to work? Now, I think this goes back to the vaccination question.
Yeah. Well, to some extent, it's an ethical and moral question. And my personal view on that is probably the same as many people on this call. I think what we're talking about is vaccination. I'm not talking about personal data, telephone numbers, addresses, national insurance numbers. I just want to know if you've been vaccinated or not. Yeah. And so to that end, to my mind, I'm more than happy for people to know if I'm vaccinated or not. I'm not yet, and I'm waiting for it, and I'm looking forward to it. Should we be able to do that? I think it's just such a hot potato question, to be honest with you, and it's certainly beyond my pay grade to answer.
Sorry to throw that one at you, David. Thank you very much. I'm sure we're going to get, and I encourage people to put on the chat lots of questions. But if we now move on to David, as I said, you'll see some issues that I'm sure we'll end up debating at the end of this clinic. So if I could introduce David, if you want to put your camera on, David, and say hello to us. David works as director of an energy saving enterprise that I know has been helping the industry for a number of years, and has got some great advice and tips just to share with you before we come back to questions. Are you there, David?
Thanks, Ian, and well done, Greg. Very good. God, how do I follow that? That's fantastic. So basically, I've been in the business for around about 20 years, helping companies, mainly in the leisure sector, save on energy and water. What I wanted to do was share with you all today about some of the ideas and energy saving projects that I worked on that I think you could install within your operation, most of which, or all of which, are cash positive from day one and significantly reduce consumption. What Ian asked me to do initially was explain a bit about what net zero carbon by 2050 actually means. So basically, the UK has committed to reducing emissions by the fastest rate of any major economy. This probably stems from the fact that in November 21, we've got the UN Climate Change Conference actually in Glasgow. So we're putting ourselves ahead on that. Now, what does net zero carbon mean? It actually means not speeding up global warming, in effect, in a nutshell. That's what it means. So this is the balance between the amount of greenhouse gases we produce and the amount removed. This is obviously different from gross zero emissions, which is reducing all emissions to zero, which is obviously not realistic. And the figures we're looking against are against 1990 levels. So I kind of hope that kind of clears things up for everybody to explain what it actually means. Going back to Greg's point, there's a number of points here on energy saving. Air purification is very, very current right now. It's a big opportunity to bring confidence back into the industry. There are a number of measures that you're doing right now. Air purification should or maybe one of those already. a lot of sites can't actually open windows and increase ventilation very well. This basically with technologies, certain technologies on air purification, we can actually cover those off without actually increasing your energy consumption. I spoke to a couple of schools recently, and they've had a massive increase in their energy spends. They've increased by 50% their energy consumption over the winter months. So they're now looking at putting in air purification systems as an energy saving measure. So there are a number of these that actually are cost neutral at worst. Obviously, for 6 months a year, you're either heating or cooling air as it comes in. We actually recommend an air purification system that kills viruses and bacteria, including human coronavirus. It has a very low ongoing cost, and also takes out pollutants out of the air as well, like carbon monoxide, like Greg suggested. There is probably a good idea to explain that there are a number of technologies out there, so you understand what is out there and what you should be putting in. There are actually 5 main types of air purification systems. There's the standard HEPA filter, which all of these systems have HEPA filters in all 5, but some of them just have the HEPA filter. Obviously, these are designed to take pollutants out of the air. They don't kill viruses. They don't take bacteria out of the air. All they do is take product out of the air. There are ionizers, which charge particles, which again group together, positives and negatives, and they get collected within the HEPA filter. Some of those go through the filter. You then find those settling on surfaces because they sink to the floor faster. There are carbon filters, which again take product out of the air. But again, they don't kill viruses. Those viruses actually stay within the filters. In fact, all 3 I've talked about so far, HEPA, ionizers and carbon filters, all would have live virus within the filters once they've cleaned the air. The 2 main products out there right now are UV, often combined with carbon, which, as you know, UV kills viruses, bacteria, and it will go through the filter. There's no live virus within the filter from UV. The only issues around UV is there's quite a large on cost with changing over the lamps every 12 months. And there's a new technology that's out there that's we're working with right now. We're quite excited about it. It's ozone treatment. Obviously, ozone stays within the unit itself. It kills viruses, bacteria. Has a NCTA reactor which takes out all the bad smells and etc. out of the air. And as the products go through the filter, the filter can be thrown away because it's a virus-free filter. So very low on costs. Again, I can give you more information after today if you're interested in looking at that. Can we move on to the next slide, please? So what I want to do as well is look at all aspects, and these are kind of fairly quick wins for you, or things that have been proven over the last 20 years for me that I think you could look at installing within your site. So obviously one obvious one is looking at procuring your energy well. Now, I've seen a lot of energy brokers. I know a lot of people have been doing this themselves, some successfully, some not so successfully. What I would recommend is looking at brokers that can actually put you through a live auction. This is very clever. So what this does is brings together people within the industry who want to supply you your energy. They then come together on a certain particular time and day, and they all kind of bid for your work. This significantly drives the prices down. So I've seen prices out there around about kind of 12.5 pence for your electricity costs, compared to others that I'm looking at like 15, 16, 17 pence per kilowatt hour. So I would highly recommend you looking at that as part of your ideas from today. Within your sites, there are 2 very large energy consumers within your site. One is the air handling system. And obviously, when you're particularly looking at these COVID times, you're going to be using that a lot more through pushing air through your sites. Now, you need to make sure your BMS is set up correctly. If you haven't got a BMS, then I would highly recommend you get one. But BMS needs to actually create demand within the site, and actually use the BMS to reduce energy within the site rather than just running it on or off. A good BMS set up correctly will have a 3-year ROI, so well worth investing in that. Pool covers, an obvious choice, but not just putting a pool cover on. If you've got a BMS installed, you can set the hours back overnight. It's a really significant saving. We do this with a lot of our clients. So it often within a pool surrounds, your pool temperature should be 1 degree above your pool. Out of hours with a pool cover on, you can reduce that back and make a massive saving overnight. You've got to keep dropping that down until you get to the point where you get a little bit too much moisture, and then you notch it back again. But there's a massive saving to be had there. Right, LED lighting, a bit of a no-brainer. If you're part of the public sector, you can actually use decarb grants that have come through. They were around between kind of September and December this year. The decarb grant scheme run by the government was free money. Lots of projects went ahead on that basis, linked to other projects. Salix funding is another one where you can actually fund your project over a 7 or 8 year period, but your payback is 4 years. So your project is cash positive from day one. Salix funding money is inexpensive. If you cannot get hold of public money through Salix funding, there are other schemes out there that I can again put you in contact with. Something called LAS, which is lighting as a service. This is a cash positive option from day one. So again, you pay back on the project is 4 years. You pay for the project over 8 years, and you'll find that you make cash positive. It's cash positive from day one. At the same time, you've got a really lovely LED new facility, and your operational savings are heavily reduced because LED lights last for a very long time, a good 8 to 10 years. One of my favorite passions in life, and has been for a long time, is water saving. This is always the poor relation, but it should not get forgotten. There's a really lovely saving here to be had. So when you come back from this lockdown period, and you find, hopefully you haven't got lower bather loads, but you may well have lower bather loads, you need to really think about this and actually adjust your backwashing regimes. Because there's no point in backwashing your pool because you've always backwashed it once or twice a week. You should backwash based on bather load and also the pressure within your filters. So there's obviously, if you're backwashing water, you're throwing water away. You have to get fresh water in. It needs to be reheated. Chemicals have to be put back in again. There's a really, really good saving there to be had. Showers, 10 litres per minute is plenty for a shower. Obviously, it's a problem if your showers are banging out 20, 25 litres per minute. Because when you swap back to 10 litres a minute, there'll be obviously a few issues within your site, but the saving is very, very fast. So if you are looking to make some savings on your sites, I would highly recommend to take a shower head that's 10 litres per minute, or put in a restrictor in your shower. 10 litres per minute is plenty, not only on water saving, but also on heating those showers too. I've worked with a lot of clients who also want to look at water rebates on their sites. There could be a really significant check out there which you don't even know about right now from the water company. Often it's a difficult route to manoeuvre. So there are companies out there that will do all the donkey work for you. They take a portion of the savings that they make, but it's a kind of a no-win, no-fee. So I highly recommend you doing something like this. And if you want to be put into contact with something like this, I can do that for you. We're talking about leaks from a swimming pool or from a site. So the reason you can make a big claim against the water company is if you've got a water leak, you've got to pay for the water that comes into the building, but you also have to pay for sewerage. Now, there's a case to say that your water did not actually go to sewer, so you shouldn't be paying sewerage on that. It basically drained away into the ground. So there are significant checks to be had out there if you can claim in the right way. We're talking tens of thousands of pounds. You can also adjust your water rates and costs through towelage, which sounds a bit strange, I know, but towelage is basically your members walking off with your water in their towels. There's a saving to be had there. It's the water company. And pool evaporation. Your pools are evaporating constantly. Again, that water is not going to drain. It's not going to the sewer. So there's another really lovely saving to be had there too. Can you pass me on to the next slide, please? Thank you. And one last thing I wanted to cover off was on-site energy generation. If done in the right way, it's a really good way of reducing your bills, because you're producing cheaper energy on site. So this is the form of solar PV, CHPs, typically over 50 kilowatts with sites with pools, and air source and ground source heat pumps. Now, all these technologies obviously seem very expensive, but if funded in the right way, again, will be cash positive for your site. So the decarb grant scheme is free money. I've heard through the grapevine this might be coming around again come September. So get yourselves ready for that position, because you could get some free money to do these steps to reduce consumption and to make some significant savings and carbon savings for your sites. Salix funding is another option. There are lease purchase arrangements with return on investments of 5 years or less, and obviously pay over 8 to 10 years, again, cash positive. And finally, there are things like power purchase agreements with companies where they put the technology in and you pay less for your electricity and heat from energy produced on site. So there's a quick run through of different technologies you can look at. I'd recommend as many of those you can put in, as they are all cash positive from day one. If you want any more information on any of this, come back to me after today. If we go on to the next slide, then any questions you've got, I can answer now for you. You've got my contact details there. If you need any information on any of the things talked about today, particularly on the air purification system, I think that's very current right now.
Brilliant. Thank you, David. I think some real, and hopefully people could see the split of in the long term, this is really going to help the things that Greg was saying about cleaner air and reducing airborne diseases. That is one of the worst issues around at the moment, and the effects of particulates, etc. So something really to focus on. I know David said it's 250, but we know we've got virtually half the local authorities in this country have already targeted 230 with climate change emergencies in the local areas. So lots of you are going to be facing issues of this far sooner than 2050. So you do have to get on board. We did have, while that was coming out, one of our client, one of our people that are on the clinic said that in the Hearts Beds area there are low carbon workplace grants of up to 5,000, and I believe that site did manage to get one for increased air handling. So some really good stuff out there, and when you get these slides you'll get David's contact details if you want to know more about that. So perhaps if I could now just throw the floor open if we've got any other questions. Jill, have you had any come in on the chat that we can pose to either?
Yes, Ian, we've got one which is sort of to you and to David. A question about these solutions for the air purification. Are these all tested and recognised to be a solution? This is from Dan at Safe Norfolk.
Do you want to start, Greg, or do you want me to go through it?
Sorry, yeah. I mean, yeah, you go for it. I'll add the science at the end.
The answer is yes. They are all proven technologies. Some are better known in certain countries than others. For example, HEPA ionizers, carbon filters, and UV have all been around the whole world for a long time. The ozone one is the one that we're currently working with. is very large in America and Asia. They sold 2 million units out there. But over in the UK, this is a new technology. Obviously, originally it was set up to clear pollution, but actually, this is the one that breaks down and actually kills human coronavirus at a kill rate of 99.9%. So yes, it is all proven. And if they want kind of certification, I'm sure on all these I can get hold of it for you.
Thank you.
Greg, do you want to come in with some of the science? Because I know we were talking earlier about the positioning of these is quite critical.
Yeah, and I think, just to follow on from Dave, there is that it is about horses for courses. It's about what you're looking to do. I think that's what's really important here. And I think Dave articulated it well, is that what you have to do as well is think about the cleaning of the air in the first instance, but also what are the byproducts of that cleaning. And I think one of the key issues around things like carbon filters and HEPA filters is that if they are picking up, which they will, down to about what's called PM 2.5, so 2.5 microns, which appears to be the most important for human health, is that what you will have is toxic byproducts. And so you have to be very, very careful with handling those byproducts, the filters themselves, because they are capturing viruses, and those viruses will remain live because they're not being destroyed. Whereas the UV, but also particularly this NCCO technology, the ozone technology, which is in a fixed unit, so you don't get ozone released outside of the unit, they actually kill viruses, bacteria, et al. I think also the other thing to think about is that it's the byproducts that we're looking for as well. So I think we've already said it, but pollution is probably the biggest. I mean, by the government's admission, is the biggest public health concern at present, and is unlikely to change. And that's why the government are doing so much to try and reduce pollution. But equally, cleaning that air, what you need is a system that can cope with nitrogen, oxygen, sulfides that can cope with VOCs, so volatile organic compounds, and actually general things like pollen that they can deal with. So I think to some extent, it is without any shadow of doubt proven technology, and it is an incredible, valuable technology out with just COVID. And we know that NCCO technology does kill human coronavirus with a very high efficacy. But it is something that will be valuable going forward, not just during this COVID-19 pandemic.
So it's something that they should be using if they can afford it, and to some extent they might not be able to afford it if they can't gain customer confidence, not only for coronavirus but for healthy places to exercise.
Yeah.
One more piece to add actually, which is that obviously I see it as an energy saving measure. I mean, I'm an energy saving expert, so the air purification, it costs money, but actually as an energy saving measure, having not having to in sites that you can't add ventilation. If you do, it's very costly. To have this in instead would be, as an air purification system, would be a big benefit.
Jill, any other questions come in? Thank you, both of you.
Yeah, I have a couple which have come in through the info email. Not quite as scientific, but general questions around some exercise. One question that's come in, do we have any specific guidance with group fitness classes being allowed to operate to a maximum of 30 people outside from the end of the month? Can we guide this person in the right direction, Ian, to where they can get this guidance, because they can't find it at the moment?
I think Greg might be able to have more up-to-date information, but my understanding is that SIMSPA and EDM have sort of confirmed it is coming out, and it will be 30 with the instructor outdoors, but I'm not sure we've actually seen that definitively from the government yet.
I mean, I would check the UK Active website. There's actually a page specifically on this, and I'll read it because I've got it open currently. It says formally organised sports. This is from the 29th of March. Formally organised outdoor sports for adults and under 18s can restart and will not be subject to gathering limits, but should be compliant with guidance issued by national governing bodies.
Right. So EDM have said 30, so...
I mean, 30 is a big number, I think, and the reason why they've put 30 is because actually it speaks into the mass gatherings of community events, so things like Park Run, and I think that they've plucked 30 out of the air. To be fair, many of these numbers are plucked out of the air. but they plucked 30 out of the air so that it doesn't include community-based mass gatherings for physical activity.
And the only caveat on that is that you're allowed to allow them to go in and use the toilets only, not changing rooms at this point in time.
Mm-hmm.
Okay, thank you, Greg, thank you, Ian. I've got another question here. Do you think that online classes is the start of the end of gyms, or is it an opportunity for the sector? Greg?
Well, it's a great question, and I think there are many people machinating over this as we currently speak. I think what we will see a continuation of online classes, but I think to some extent what it will provide is this mixed model. And I think that what operators shouldn't be afraid of is the fact that I don't think it will replace the gym. People go to the gym for an awful lot of reasons. The bottom line is that they go for socialization because they want to be with other people. They also go for equipment because many people don't have the equipment that's required. And not everybody can afford some of the equipment that is currently out there that people say is going to be the future. It's not going to be the future because it's out of the price range of most people. But that said, I do think it will create a mixed model of physical activity. So I think that, and where operators, will be ahead of the game is actually if they provide that internally. So my club, I'm at the Marlow Club. They've done an incredibly good job during lockdown at providing online support. And my conversations with the team down there is actually to continue that, because I think what you are doing is you're engaging with your clients who will want it in a mixed model. They want exercise on demand, when it suits them. So I think online will continue, but I think that with that, and we've seen that post lockdown 1 and post lockdown 2, the surge in people coming back into gyms. People want facilities. Obviously, they haven't got their own swimming pools. They will always come back for pools. So I think, the short answer is it'll be a mixed model, and I think that the operators who can provide that mixed model will retain members much easier, and because they're providing a better service.
Jill, can I just butt in with a question that one's come up on our chat line? And sorry, this is Greg again, so although you could try and answer it, David, if you want. Is there a definition for formally organised sports? They've been struggling to find what that definition is to apply it to the guidance.
Listen, I mean, no, yes, it's an interesting one. No is the answer to that, although there is an attempt at it. And it's actually been the same with elite sport, because what we do know is that elite sport has been open throughout the pandemic. And then what constitutes elite, and certainly athletes that I work with who aren't on national governing body lists of elite athletes, but are without any shadow of doubt elites. I worked with a young lady who was attempting to break the record for solo row across the Atlantic, a formidable athlete. Whose attempt was scuppered because she actually couldn't get any support from government as she was elite, albeit that was her sole source of income. She was a professional athlete. So I think it comes down to interpretation. It's a tricky one. So if I tell you, one of the big problems, one of the interesting issues is for guys of my age is actually masters sport, is that we're allowing, for example, at swim squads, under 18s are allowed to start squad training in the upcoming opening on the 12th of April, but that doesn't include over 18s. So Masters squad swimmers can't swim, and yet Masters squad swimmers can attend a public session and swim in a public lane. So I think, again, my frustration here is the nuance, and it comes down to the fact that the people making the decisions simply don't understand the environment. And that's, so I don't actually have an answer for you.
Hopefully that can explain to some of our clients why we're very nuanced in our responses to them, because we don't necessarily know it either. So no. It's a difficult one. The one thing I would just caveat for everybody is we know that the HSE, HOs are now taking a slightly different view than the supportive, helpful at the end of the first lockdowns, and I think we will see far more interpretations from them. And if we're blatantly trying to find ways around the guidance, which will continue, I think they will take a far more enforcing approach than a a supportive approach. So I think we do need to be careful. We need to stay within the bounds and not try to push clever ways that we think we found around things, and stay within what the moral issues are here of trying to make sure we work together for safe economic reopening for all of us.
And you know, and notwithstanding that, you know, if the roadmap goes as it currently is, then 21st of June, all of those will be lifted anyway. So I think it does feel like a long way off. But you know, to get to the 21st of June where everything can restart as normal would be a fantastic achievement, I think.
But hopefully with some of the improvements for long-term health on other issues being built in along the way.
Absolutely.
if we can afford it.
Yep.
Jill, anything else?
I think both of you have just answered one of the questions. Well, there's a couple of questions in the chat around social distancing and the mitigating controls we've got in place, and when they will end. So I think you've just covered that. I'm conscious of the time. It's now 22 to 12, and I think we could probably keep this clinic going for another hour or so. Greg, it would be good to invite you back probably to another of our clinics, maybe to the latter end of the year when we're probably functioning in a bit into normality, and yourself, David. We have been conscious in the past that we've said that we will keep these clinics to an hour-ish. So on that note, I'm going to pass over to Caroline to finish off and close the clinic. And just before I go, just thank you, Greg, and thank you, David, for agreeing to come on the clinic. And thank you, Ian, as always, for your contribution. Caroline, over to you. You're muted again, Caroline.
I can safely say that I know virtually every single line in body pump 111, 112 and 113. And I cannot wait to get back to instructors making mistakes, and us all making mistakes. Me and my son, you know, we do body pumping just for exercise, and I'm bored stupid with it. So I'm looking forward to getting back in the gym. Jill, can we just scan through the next one? Right, okay, just briefly, Quest Prime, we've got some webinars coming up again because we're conscious there's quite a lot of new organisations joining us. We will be having a Quest Prime webinar on the 1st of April. And just for information, Sport England are currently handing out the National Leisure Recovery Fund money, and they have some money left in the pot if any local authorities who have received any funds, who have on in-house, are interested in having a complimentary Quest Prime assessment on them. Can you just ping me an email, and I will forward the details to Emma at Sport England. So they still have a pot of money. So if there is anybody out there that would be interested in having a free Quest Prime assessment, they have to be done by July. If you're interested, ping me an email at the end. My email address is caroline@rightdirections.co.uk, or you can email us at Quest. Next slide, Jill. Speed on past this. We'll talk about this next time. Our next clinic is on the 8th of April, subject to key announcements. If there isn't any big announcements, we may not run it, but hopefully there'll be plenty to talk about, and I'm sure we'll have other guest speakers who can have other different things to talk about. I've been sitting in on some of the active partnerships conference seminars this week, and I've just listened to a fantastic one on tackling racism. So it'll be fantastic if we can start getting back to the priorities of getting the inactive active and breaking down the barriers, as Greg has talked about today. So hopefully we'll be able to move on and start talking about other things in our clinics, not just ventilation and social distancing and COVID. So thank you, Greg, and thank you very much, David, for your time today. We really, really appreciate it. And we're pleased that we're singing the right messages when we do our clinics with the clients and the industry. So thank you very much, everybody, and we'll catch up with you again very soon.